When the second child was a little older, Magda could not wait to restart with her interests she considered vital. Continuously preaching to me on a daily basis, she repeated, "We must spend more time with our witnessing duties, going house to house and pleasing our Father Jehovah, and that must be our priority." It was clearly obvious that I could not please her even if I followed a belief system as dictated by her witness brothers. It would never work, for she preferred to have all kinds of excuse to belittle me, or try to make me feel embarrassed in front of her elite friends. Was it to please them? Was it due to the popular belief that all men are thoughtless? I could not be sure whether it was what she had been brought up with, or could not be stirred even when she treated me like a toddler. "Did you say thank you?" Or, "You must respect them when they speak to you." If I dared to say something about this issue, her reaction would always be, "Respect must be earned." Obviously, they have all earned her respect. My marriage was on shaky grounds right from the beginning, and I was prepared for any surprises. My patience remained like a stubborn donkey's, and I was ready for Magda to make the first move, just like in a game of chess. In the meantime, I hoped that the whole experience was a passing dream, or ugly nightmare I would wake up from, and that painful feeling would be no more. In a diary I wrote, "Oftentimes you cry, oftentimes you laugh, sometimes asking, why? Often you try, at times you fail, sometimes you walk, sometimes you could fly. Seasons come and go, time becomes a river. Your pasts and tomorrow all become a mighty now. You keep flowing and keep on trying. So distant, yet so near. What has passed you by? A life of dreams flies, subjected to many lies. That is what it seems, a life of endless dreams. Look at them again, now with an open mind. Live your life, be true. To you, be kind. Enjoy your nows, and live it through." When BJD Electronics was struggling in the harsh climate of the then economics, Ben decided to dismiss a number of people. That is when I decided to display a variety of my paintings and sculptures semi-permanently in a department store, also struggling to survive. We elected to put my paintings amongst the colorful materials in the curtain and soft furnishings department on the top floor of an old Victorian building close to Meyer Melbourne stores. Interestingly, some people employed in their furniture department showed great interest in them. They were willing to buy my works in bulk. It sounded great, and I was very happy to see my works being displayed in their stores. For me, it was better to sell them a little cheaper than waiting for a long period of time for far better prices. They displayed them in their furniture and bedding departments, as well as distributing them to other states, like New South Wales, Brisbane, and Perth. But their sale prices were a lot higher than what I had been paid. Some people considered it a very silly thing to do on my part. However, this venture could be profitable for my name to become known amongst art lovers. When I visited Perth later, discovering my paintings at Myers, which was then known as Bones, I inquired if I could supply them with my paintings directly, and was told that I should approach their office in Melbourne even if I lived in WA. This reminds me of a certain gentleman collecting old artifacts from the seafloor along the coastal areas of Victoria, who was keen to have a painting depicting the ancient Lockard disaster not far from the famous 12 Apostles in this part of the world. That was one of my first assignments in Australia. It depicted a huge storm lashing the coast and the tragic end of a great ship. I felt this encouraged Magda to try her hands at painting again, and with my help she began to express herself in acrylics. Soon after, a married couple asked me to paint a large painting representing ancient Egypt, a felucca taking the pharaoh to his final destination as the olden artists painted in their temples, under the directions of the priesthood. I went to their home to see where they wanted to have this work done, and once we had decided what size it needed to be, I made a few creative suggestions, one of which I implemented. I utilized some cement and small pebbles to create an embossed work of art, and painted over it, which really looked so real and was three-dimensional. However, when the department store next to Myers had to close their doors, after being in business for many years, I decided to display my works in different venues. 388 Collins Street is a magnificent Gothic building. It is occupied by the ANZ Bank and is a very beautiful edifice. When they accepted having my paintings displayed in their bank chambers, I was excited about the prospect of a successful exhibition. I had a large number of paintings and displayed them for a long while, creating great interest. If I did not sell anything, I would still consider it a success, for many people were introduced to my paintings, but having sold several was great encouragement. However, spending more time in artistic and business interests was unappealing to Magda. I was apparently becoming too materialistic for her liking. I certainly met interesting people during this period, from the days of selling encyclopedias, including World Book ones, to selling real estate, to electronics testing, and coffee shop development, as well as exhibiting my paintings. Almost all of them have become my friends. Some of them were from an academic background, others were doctors and businessmen, still others had interests in philosophy, and some were into occult exploration. Discovering that there was a different world out there, other than the world which existed with Magda, was a great delight. It was now time to discover the eastern side of Melbourne. I specifically desired to move into St. Kilda, Brighton, or even somewhere along the Mornington Peninsula, but a number of people attempted to oppose my decision. They spoke in terms of crime and prostitution being ripe in that area of the city, and that the western suburbs were the best, but my research decried otherwise. Under no circumstances was I able to encourage Magda to move into the split-level house I bought through A.V. Jennings, for she was absolutely adamant in her decision that she simply did not like it and preferred that we keep renting. Admittedly, I am unsure if she understood me. I contemplated selling the house and perhaps even start living in the Toorak area. There was a delightful house on Bruce Street. It was a two-story hacienda-style building. Bearing in mind the possible circumstances in regard to my alleged family, the best choice for me was to live my life behind closed doors, living a life completely in secrecy, hidden away in a pod, removed from the rest of the real world. Even under all those circumstances, I loved my family. I sacrificed my time, my efforts and creativity to make sure their health and well-being was always prioritized. However, I could not force Magda to love or accept me as I was. I left it to her, for she was also a free agent. But she primarily chose to please the witnesses with all her might, and did not want to be materialistic. She certainly earned my respect. Respect must be earned. While all this was happening, I discovered a few budding artists trying to sell their works door to door. One day I decided to visit where they were based to learn a little more about their operations. I hoped that maybe we could all combine our efforts and turn it into a profitable business. If it worked, it would help those artists to build themselves up financially, while also helping to sell my works. One of my creative suggestions was to start a scheme in which we could rent our paintings to offices in the city. This would provide some income to the young and unknown artists, while creating beautiful color in those normally bleak-looking office interiors. Some considered it to be a brilliant idea with profitable potential. A few decided to open a shop in Chapel Street, Suren. It was going to be the center of operations. Local artists would be able to bring in their works and display them in an almost permanent exhibition. There were going to be door-to-door salespeople employed to promote those works of art, and there were many young people who looked for clean and not so tiring jobs, or to fill seasonal holiday employment. I was to become the resident artist and in charge of the artistic side of the business. I decided to create works of art by the window so that every shopper could stop and enjoy the workings of an artist. A little later, I was in partnership with this new business. We were generating a reasonably good income by simply being there, and it was helping other local artists. We employed a young gentleman to create pen, pencil, and charcoal drawings, but he preferred to continue only with pen and ink illustrations. A short period passed, and I started offering lessons in drawing and painting to interested people and those who had never attempted to do anything before, helping them discover their own inner artist. We called the gallery and shop Artistic Decor, facing the town hall. One partner was involved in an escort service on St. Kilda Road. They had a number of happy girls employed there, and one day they asked me to paint portraits of the girls working for them. When I visited that business for the first time, I discovered that all the girls were interested in fame, and having their portraits painted was exciting them greatly. But I was determined to have no other closeness with any of them other than paint their images. It seemed I surprised a few people by being in complete control. This was also an experience I have never shared with Magda, for fear of hurting her, as she was showing signs of extreme jealousy. Another time, as I remember so clearly, when I was painting a very ancient Australian dunny on a largish canvas with a farmland setting, complete with a number of sheep in the distance. People passing by were making interesting comments. As usual, next to my easel, I had a piece of wooden board I used to clean my brushes on. I also had a few other easels with canvases on them, and I used to paint any of them as I pleased, depending on my mood. A newly married couple admired my works, along with those other local artists' paintings. The gentleman approached me, asking to stop with the painting I was working on and sign it, and that they would collect it in the morning. They were very certain about what they wanted and would pay for it as long as it was not too expensive, for they were just starting out. He was a lawyer. I could not decide a price of my work, and we were going to do that the next day. In the morning, at 9, the said gentleman arrived quite excited about the painting he wanted to purchase, but he was disappointed, as he could not see it. I showed the image of the Outback Dunny, and had even signed it. He told me this was not the work he was after, for he wanted to have the other beautiful work which stood next to my painting, which was leaning against the wall. When I picked up my cleaning board with multiple colors, seeing it, he shouted in excitement, "That is my painting! I am so happy you did not sell it to somebody else. But you didn't sign it yet." I signed it, and very seriously gave him the work which had excited them. When he inquired what price I thought of asking, I requested him to make a suggestion. He offered me $500 in a very shy manner and told me, "I hope this will be enough. I really love this painting." I did not think even a cleaning board could be worth anything. Beauty is indeed in the eyes of the beholder. I hope even now that it has provided them with some joy and meaning. When we at Artistic Decor decided to have an opening event with a special exhibition of select works of art, with a traditional wine and cheese presentation, I made mention of it to Magda, but she did not want to have anything to do with the worldly people. However, soon after, she consulted her only friends, the witnesses, and decided to follow me, as there was no harm in it, organizing her friends to babysit our children that evening. The premier made an opening speech, and guests and other dignitaries viewed our works of art. I received praise, and during the wine and cheese cocktail party, newspaper reporters took lots of photographs. Magda and a few fellow artists, together with my images, were prominently displayed in the next days, as well as weekly papers. Unfortunately, once again, one of the reporters named me differently than my own name, causing much light-hearted banter. When Magda became aware of her images being printed in the papers, she was not unhappy, but as she repeatedly said, she hoped she did not cause any impression of being interested in worldliness. I hoped her dearest brothers would eventually calm her down. On the front page of the popularly known tabloid Turok Times, there was a portrait of Rudolf Nureyev when he was visiting Australia, and inside our images of the opening night were displayed. The images were large. This printing led the way for Mr. Nureyev to have his portrait drawn by me. Then he was going to treasure it. I remember the wise words of Jackson Browne. Opportunity dances with those who are already on the dance floor. One other time they nominated me to represent Artistic Decor on television. Hearing this, Magda became quite excited, but reminded me that we should avoid becoming too worldly. However, she was happy to capture the images from the television at her witness brother's home. And if they knew how to do it, she might even have the sound recorded on cassette. It looked very promising. I was unsure whether it was because I made mention of how I would like to record that occasion, or was it because she wanted to have a memory of the event so that she could send it to her parents in Germany, or was it on advice of her brothers in faith? For somebody who could not stand electronics, it was an unexpected surprise. I had made a very creative suggestion to my partners at Artistic Decor. I was going to paint a large oil portrait of the presenter of the morning program on Channel O, as it was then known, which later became Network 10. Daily programs were still presented in black and white, although a small number of people had color televisions and some programs were streaming in color. I painted that portrait in sepia tones, thus making his blue eyes look light brown. I presented Artistic Decor in a promotional way, and the art classes we provided, giving a chance to young artists to display their art and assist them in selling their works. Then I spoke a little about myself as an international artist, and presented the portrait as a gift from me, as well as on behalf of the company I was representing. The interview created great interest and attracted more people and more profit for the young artists displaying their works. The presenter mentioned he wished that everybody was watching the program in color, for the portrait was stunning, and he could not contain his excitement. Only one thing made him more surprised. He told the audience that his eyes had become brown in the portrait, and said he always wished to have brown eyes. This program was repeated several times. Magda had taken a few still pictures off the television screen when I appeared and presented the portrait during the program. Later she told me how everybody was so excited seeing me on the screen. Probably Magda was also equally excited about it, but she never mentioned it. However, much later she told me that it may have been fine to appear on television, yet one should never forget that it was still the devil's tool. We should not lose our heads over it, and not expose ourselves too much, for fame is an evil thing, she would often repeat. Everybody appearing on television had makeup applied, but I preferred not to have it on my face. However, the makeup artists insisted that to eliminate the shine from the studio lights, it was important to apply a little powder on every participant's face. I did not have a beard then, and I had a head of large curls. Many people tried to contact me afterwards, and there were offers for me to take part in some of the soapies on television, as well as appear in commercials. I remained involved with my academic tutoring in behavioral psychology, and many of my friends and students at the university were very excited about my appearance on television. For a long time they spoke about it. During this period, I was also involved in solo and choir singing with several groups, including the Victorian Liedertafel. We were befriended with a Canadian couple involved with Artistic Decor, who invited us to their home for a meal, but afterwards the husband asked me why our daughter was constantly swinging her legs under the dinner table and kicking his knees. I apologized and suggested that next time we would make sure the child sat elsewhere. I told him that he should have told me then and there, instead of suffering such childish nonsense, and he was calmed. I continued with my association with them for a while longer, until one day they had organized yet another opening for an exhibition event together with wine and cheese. As the evening advanced, he suddenly asked me to follow him outside and fiercely rebuked me, saying, what was it that I was talking about in regard to their background? I was shocked and wondered what it was that I had supposedly spoken about. There was obviously somebody who did not like me around, and created a lie about me having said whatever it was. Even now I have not discovered what it was that I apparently upset them with. I wondered how a good friend could react the way he did. Then he exclaimed that I must have encouraged our child to kick him under the dinner table. He was really drunk, or maybe under the influence of habit-forming illegal substances. But I was in utter shock nevertheless. It was totally unexpected. Then he told me to pack up all my junk and buzz off quickly, otherwise he was going to pulverize my bones. So I went upstairs, where my art students were gathered for the evening's art class, and told them I was no longer wanted by a member of the partnership, and that I should pack up my things and buzz off. Otherwise he was intent to crush my bones, and therefore the classes were no longer going to be held there. By kicking me out like that, I wondered how they would survive, for after all this business had been created upon my suggestions, and a special program needed to be followed, and I was playing the major role there. Maybe they were involved in something illegal I was not meant to know anything about, or maybe some legal issue was likely to surface which I did not know, and the business was doomed to close. Even perhaps it was due to their own sensitivities, and that individual was willing to sacrifice everything, including removing me from their midst, because of their suspicious activities. Perhaps it was a good thing that it happened. Maybe we were dealing with a mentally unstable person. I was not sure, and indeed I packed what I could put my hands on and left the place for good, knowing that they were going to close their doors. At that stage I did not even collect my earnings, and simply walked away. When they destroyed their business, I contemplated that I could always go back to establishing a similar one if I wanted. I was going to take some time for now and think about it while still occupying myself with academic engagements. It was not going to be easy to tell anything to Magda, but I was going to find a way of explaining matters. The next time I went to Praen, having decided to visit a number of schools, primary or advanced, and spoke with a number of their principals and teachers, I discovered they had a great need to have someone who could organize a project to liaise between parents of ethnic children and the school authorities. After several negotiations and a number of discussions with local government authorities, we decided to create a 7 combined schools project, which was partially funded. They hired several like-minded professionals representing different ethnic groups from multilingual backgrounds. There was a desperate need to liaise with Turkish and Cypriot migrants housed mainly in housing commission flats in the area. I took that responsibility on for a while. It involved lots of interpreting, translating, and helping families to adapt to Australian society. We even organized events to let the locals know that we had such a service. In one such, I trained some Turkish children to sing a couple of traditional songs and present traditional dances from their country of origin. I organized the piano accompaniment and recorded the whole event. Apart from making a speech in several languages and interpreting English into Turkish, although my Turkish was not perfect. I can still recall the hour when the children were singing the famed Üsküdar. Later I decided to attend a short interpreter's course, particularly in Turkish at RMIT in Melbourne, and started to work with the Victorian branch of government interpreters. By occupying myself in this important service, I improved my Turkish language skills. For a considerable time, even long after the 7 Combined Schools project no longer existed, as there was no funding under the changed political setup, I continued with courtroom interpreting through the Victorian legal system. From country court to magistrates, they all needed my assistance. A number of legally case-sensitive issues have been greatly educational. My forensic skills and insight came in very handy. Some Turks who had illegally transferred habit-forming substances inside motorcycle parts were intercepted and brought to court, begged me to tell any made-up stories to the magistrate so that they were not jailed. They even threatened me when speaking in their tongue, but under oath I could only interpret everything as uttered with every detail. I also did medical interpreting to doctors, as well as in the operating theaters. In the legal arena, a number of work-related compensation cases required my close involvement. I have sometimes been in danger zones, with people trying to either bribe me or at times silence me. Luckily, we were well protected by the authority. I kept painting and holding a variety of exhibitions. Some were photorealistic and many were contemporary, all around Melbourne, Sydney, and parts of Europe, including Paris, Madrid, and Düsseldorf. The income derived from those exhibited works of art was irregular, and timely payment of expenses could be jeopardized. Taking that into account, I needed to try yet another venture. I again applied to Myers stores in the city for employment, hoping it would be part-time, and found a storeman's position in Collingwood. For a while I worked there, counting, putting things on shelves, and taking them down for the relevant department, and occasionally loading trucks. From time to time I used to take myself to the city stores in trucks going that way, and the drivers were very friendly to storemen. I made new friends at Myer. I loved frequenting their canteen in the city, and after lunch going back to work, putting my grey overcoat on, and continuing with what I was doing. That was a very pleasant experience. I still remember old Reginald Munn, who passed on to me a little children's story he had written for his young daughter Leslie when very young, and asked me to publish it for him later. He was frightened of having a bypass operation, and was asking his friends what would be the right action to undertake. He was a very heavy smoker. I told him that if he did not have that operation, his life could end at any time according to the information he shared. He answered me saying that his doctors were saying the same thing. He asked me again what I would do in this regard, and in answer I told him that if it was me, I would certainly accept the life-saving operation. We did not know each other well at the time, and yet, as he often expressed, he knew I was a trustworthy and well-educated person. Unfortunately, his operation was not a great success. Afterwards, when he was able to resume his duties and could do light jobs, he cried in enormous pain. His lower leg, where they had taken a piece of vein, was excruciatingly painful. We all suggested he should take time off and relax, but a few days later he was sadly gone. We all felt very sad for poor Reg. He used to tease a young Jewish boy, Michael, working with us, telling him he would be a real man when he was married, therefore he should have a girlfriend. Michael used to feel embarrassed about that issue, but was also very saddened about the loss of a genuine work colleague. For some reason, Michael was not too keen about someone else who also was employed there, with a name which sounded like Chamberlain. But he was a very quiet person, and was only concerned about his work, and did not take much note of anybody. For a short while, we had the company of a medical student soon to graduate, and he did not like Turkish coffee, as he believed it seemed to cause soft stools for him. My time in a storeman's position with Meyer was certainly remarkable. For a time, I worked in their display department, other times in their furniture department, and for a while I worked in their children's rooftop entertainment connected to their toy section during Christmas. Sometimes I was Father Christmas, and others a clown entertaining children with jokes, stories, and jumping dogs. Those dogs were well trained to jump through the large rings covered with colored tissue paper, like drums, and they used to jump through in very funny ways, making the young ones laugh. I was Dodo, and enjoyed every moment. Some even thought I must have been born a clown, but it was my part-time job. Magda occasionally brought our girls to the rooftop, and they had a wonderful time sharing simple rides. I loved hearing the children's laughter. When they were happy, I was happier. Going back in time, by 1975, we had a third child, a boy. We called him Claude Suren, and he was a bundle of joy, the same as our second child, who too was born in Melbourne, and we had named her Birgit Katharina. Claude was a Sagittarian, Birgit was a Leo, Annette was a Gemini, and Magda was represented by the star sign Cancer. Some people popularly love to interpret those signs, but I remain very critical, for all those astrological calculations are so generalized. When Magda was pregnant with Claude, I was engaged in assembling the computer control systems for traffic lights for a company called Eagle Signal Traffic Signal Systems. It was a fun job. There were a variety of people, for instance, a very friendly Jewish gentleman who was employed as the floor manager. I created a few test projects to make traffic signaling for all vehicles on the roads more efficient and make the roads safer for pedestrians. I was able to conduct a small number of tests for my own needs for physics experimentation. I remember how I made people working on the workstation laugh with my imitation of the birds. They used to laugh at my eating habits, such as consuming sunflower kernels, which they considered as bird seeds, and so I turned their sarcasm into a joke they could never forget. I was the birdman of the company. There was another gentleman who was tall, thin, and red-bearded. He was a very friendly person, who some others considered a hippie. But I could talk about almost anything esoteric with him. On the other hand, the world did not end, as Jehovah's Witnesses prophesied, and I think they were all very disappointed. At the time I was still living with Magda and the children. However, a while later I moved out to the St. Kilda-Elwood area, into a 3-story building in a very interesting neighborhood, Austin Avenue, after our first separation, which I will be telling you more about. Unfortunately, employment in Victoria was not quite perfect, and not absolutely permanent under the then government, without blaming the authority. If only my posts as a lecturer had provided a sufficient income, I would certainly not have undertaken any other part-time jobs. I was also occupying myself with other interesting hobbies, like Toastmaster, while offering promotional lectures outside academic engagements and enjoying them utterly. I even tried, for a short period of time, lecturing as part of the training for those who undertook business studies supported by the local and federal government authorities. I tried my hand in union movements with the then Labour Party and met some interesting politicians. I found by being involved with cultural activities I was free, not depressed into a dull coma as with any involvement with religious or cultist movements. It also took me closer to getting to know Australians and their unique culture. But let me take you back in time just a little and tell you some of my cherished memories of the times before continuing. Shortly after our arrival in Melbourne, and not needing to wait a full term as decreed by the constitutional system for naturalization and becoming an Australian citizen, I attended a ceremony in Moonee Ponds, and after a number of interesting people's speeches, I too was offered my citizenship certificate. Knowing that I had the same rights as any other Australian citizen, I felt really proud and happy. Now I could be content by being able to call this magnificent land home and not feeling lost any more. When the time came, I could vote for a political party and do everything expected of me as an Australian citizen. It was the greatest thing that could ever happen. My next important move was going to change my unwanted identity to my original name, after a lengthy research into the history of my ancestry. As mentioned, Magda preferred to keep her German citizenship, as she did not want to be identified otherwise, often saying, "Who knows? Many things can happen, and I might need to go back home. I don't want to lose my German citizenship." According to her belief, she did not need to vote, recognize the flag, or the national anthem she was not familiar with. It was completely up to her, and I could not force her into accepting something she could not be happy with. As a cultured human being, although she presented a persona incapable of seeing it, it was impossible for me not to respect her wishes. When I lived in Elwood with my daughters after the wretched separation, I undertook semi-permanent jobs such as ethnic liaison and health officer, based in offices at Melbourne Town Hall, 100 Little Collins Street, a childcare facility in North Melbourne, and also in Flemington, near the Housing Commission apartments. These last two areas were populated mainly by Turks and a few other nationalities. I partially utilized my profession in finding ways to help people with foreign lingual backgrounds, interpreting, helping them with housing and employment issues, as well as finding solutions to their financial concerns. I became a source of information in their socio-economic, health and childcare issues. I provided childcare and mothercraft assistance by liaising with the appropriate authorities, attending monthly meetings, providing them with necessary reporting and recommendations. Some Turks considered me as an interpreter, translator, or social worker. I tried to help as many people as I could. If I have been an asset for the state government, legal or health systems, I am very happy. I met a number of interesting people and made great friends. In the Flemington apartments there lived an elderly lady named Ethel, with her daughter and aged son-in-law. Her daughter was in love with a younger man who was a tailor. He became an Australian citizen and even changed his name to an Anglo-Saxon one. When I met them, Ethel's daughter was already divorced from an older man who had treated her harshly and was living with that younger gentleman. Whenever I visited them to find solutions to their little problems, Ethel almost always prepared a breakfast, asking me to share the food with them, as she did with all her guests. The poor woman felt happiest when people tasted the food she cooked as a token of appreciation, although it was not appropriate for any government employee to accept such things. Turks, like other nationalities, had different traditions we needed to understand without participating, while teaching them the Australian way of life. It seemed that they all appreciated the help provided. One day she told me that some Turkish friends of theirs warned her to be cautious with this interpreter Suren, for he may be an Armenian. Hearing this, she became extremely agitated with those people. How they dared accuse you of being an Armenian dog. I told them, she said, how can you accuse a man who helps everybody with that? I would cut the throat of any Armenian dog and murder him. He is certainly not a dog. He is like a son to me. Sometime she intended to holiday in Turkey, and somehow, having obtained my parents' address, she wanted to visit them. Obviously, to tell them how their son, the intelligent young man, helped everybody. I needed to call my brother on the telephone to warn them about such a visit from Efil, because of what she had said to me, that she would murder the Armenian dogs. Another family I was befriended with lived in North Melbourne. The husband suffered manic depression and psychosis, and his wife remained home to look after the family on welfare payments. They had 3 children, a daughter attending ballet school, a son, and lastly a younger daughter suffering crippling cerebral palsy, who required 24-hour help with all her needs. The father was an ex-truck driver and was hospitalized several times in a mental institution. They were Chechnya Turks. They had similar traditions like the other Turks, and whoever visited them was often served snacks and tea. I hope I have been able to help them with their needs in my capacity as a government employee. I often visited this man with his psychological issues in hospital and listened to his frequently repeated stories. He felt extremely devastated about his daughter's condition and was talking to a number of gods as he hallucinated in his current mindset. Whosoever spoke to him he considered a god, and complained about his daughter's condition, asking, "What was my sin, that I deserved such a sick child? Tell me why. Tell me." He was also the one who at one stage kicked me in my back and damaged part of my spine and a rib. Our family situation further deteriorated, and I was no longer communicating with Magda. As far as she was concerned, I was a devil worshipper and the evil one. Under the influence and directive of the witnesses, she said she needed to consider her position. Henry David Thoreau wrote, "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away." Personally, I've always considered everybody else's interests first, even when it meant sacrificing my own valuable time and safety. As I said before, when others are happy, I am the happiest person. When people are content and full of smiles in my presence, I enjoy great satisfaction for their joy and good health. When I can help others feel healthy, I am grateful for their well-being. When people feel pain and are unhappy, I feel their pain. When they cry, I cry in my silence, for there is a discordant ripple in the fabric of the cosmos. My inner nature, trying everything in my capacity, working on that circumstance so that joy and good health can be restored. But I also know that in a human world one can be faced with disharmony, yet it can be transmuted into harmony, and chaos can be turned into order. The whole universe is based upon the principles of chaos and order, and to detect the difference between the two, some awareness is needed. Awareness which can be studied through the science of psychology, observation, and comprehension. I have seen too many ugly things and experienced far too many negative emotions directed at me, especially from my wife and Jehovah's Witnesses, who did not know anything else other than hating everything and everybody. Obviously, they were unable to see the difference between love and hatred. Why was it? Maybe it was due to me being different. Maybe the color of my eyes disturbed some people. I cannot say. Maybe I was too naive to see the reality of things, but I always sought peace, beauty in all things and all people. That was not due to belonging to a religious order or belief in some exotic deity. It was due to my nature and what I was brought up with. Having a forgiving and tolerant nature never meant weakness of character on my part. However, when I was hurt, I made it clear what was hurting me when appropriate, thereby eliminating the chance of destructive negative emotions developing. I always sought better solutions and friendships, but I was not always seen as an amicable person by certain people. Sometimes I was threatened. Often I was accused of wrongdoing and telling lies. Alas, at times I was bombarded with wrong advice about things I needed not to have or do. I do not think I was alone in this. Like everybody else, I also made mistakes, but my aim has always been never to repeat them without blaming myself or others, and without hurt to anybody. When there was a seeming hurt to anybody, with things I did or said, I have seen the value of seeking forgiveness, without making much ado. Forgiving is not a sign of weakness, but there have been those who would only seek wrong in me, thus blaming me forever for every mishap in their lives. Some of my kin, as well as my beloved wife, belonged to that category. Yet if only they could put all their differences aside and converse with me in an amicable way, many things could be clarified, and possible enmities avoided. On the other hand, I feel some of those past associates were no real friends of mine, not even to themselves. In my inner world, I only placed those who were genuine, and others I could only consider like passing shadows, without any negative thought directed to them. I loved all my friends for who they were, and those others who braved themselves to be my opposition, I could only offer my unconditional love, for they shared the same life stream like the rest of us. This has always been my motto: let love unconditional be the guiding light. Amelia Barr expresses how I feel clearly in her words. It is only in sorrow bad weather masters us. In joy we face the storm and defy it. Song and music has always been my interest. I even contemplated joining several other choirs as well as the Welsh male voices. This way I was to discover many more friends not yet met. This way we were going to share things I was keenly interested in. What a wonderful way to value one's time. However, these have been some of my sins amongst many others. I continued with my connections with astronomy and UFO research activities with different groups, and even purchased a beautiful Hammond organ, for I loved the ethereal sounds it created. By playing beautiful classic pieces on the piano, I learned the value of harmony when I was very young. The music scores I read from newly obtained sheet music helped me further. However, in Magda's presence, it was impossible even when I played what I composed for her and presented it as a gift, for obviously it was not her interest, considering my interests as wasting valuable time with mundane childishness. Every time I played a melody, she nagged me for not being interested in her or her belief. However, if I would spend time only reading the Bible or Watchtower magazines, she would regard it as valuable time spent with the family and as a sign of maturity. But in her mind, with my interests, I was extremely mature in every way. In addition to this, she constantly asked how it felt when I supposedly kissed this or the other lady, and if they had better or fresher breath than hers, or were their kisses nicer than hers, or if they had great legs. It was becoming very hurtful to see how insecure she was, for in total honesty, I was doing none of the things she accused me with. At this point, I feel the need to tell you some of my experiences in more detail. I remember an unusual tram ride to North Melbourne when a Sudanese girl sat next to me, asking for directions. I had to get off a lot earlier than her, therefore I quickly explained where to catch the other tram, which would take her where she wanted to go. Opposite me, on the right-hand side of the tram, sat a few mature-aged ladies, looking at me intently, as if they personally knew me, while whispering amongst themselves, continually observing me and the Sudanese girl next to me. They left long before me, and I did not think about it as being something important, but when I arrived home, Magda had a very long face, and was literally sulking. That worried me, and I needed to know what it was that bothered her. She did not want to talk, and remained like that for a long time, singing her song of silence. I prepared light snacks and tea for us. For a while she kept reading a number of pages of her Bible silently, and went to bed without saying good night, not even touching the food. I took it as just being her usual anger towards me, without knowing what my sin was, as I often experienced these behavior patterns. Obviously, I had committed a grave sin again, which I had no idea about. I stayed in the lounge, listening to a light classical performance on ABC FM, knowing it was also a sin. About 3 o'clock in the morning she came out, made a cup of tea, and said with a croaky voice that she could not sleep thinking about it. I innocently asked what was keeping her awake. she nervously answered me, saying that I should know it. I wanted to know what it was. She said, "You have been seen. Did you know that?" I asked what she meant by that, and she answered me in her habitual manner. "Why do you pretend as if you are innocent? You know what I'm saying." I could neither understand nor could guess what I should know. There are some witness sisters I know. They are from another congregation, and they would never tell lies. They told me all about your black girlfriend. I asked what girlfriend it was, and she further answered me extremely nervously. "That black girl you were together in the tram, and you two were very close to each other, like lovers. You cannot hide it from me. I'm so ashamed of you, and you are still playing around with other females behind me. Now tell me, was she nice when you kissed her lips, and her eyes fixed on you? Who knows what else you do behind me when you say you are at work? Remember, those sisters can never tell lies. Do you want to stay with me, or go with her? You think I'm not good enough for you." At first I did not know how to react to this outburst, and kept silent for a while. Then I told her, "It is not my interest, take it or leave it, and somebody is telling you lies, but it is not me." I do not think she believed me at all, because apparently I was drifting away from the truth, and all kinds of surprises could be expected of me. Magda never showed any interest in my desires or needs other than occasionally wanting to know how to go about painting in acrylics and replicating photographs. That was fine, while discovering ways to develop one's unique styles in painting. I hoped she would continue with this as a newly developed hobby, for it could assist her in many ways later. However, all my other interests, hobbies, and research have remained as intrusions. Distractive, childish gameplay without any value as she preferred to consider them. Under no circumstances was I going to give up with them, and if anybody could not accept me as I was, they could never be a genuine friend to me anyway. It was just like the story of Mullah Nasreddin, where he encountered a bird seller trimming the beak and long legs of a stork, and when he questioned the reasons for such trimming, the bird seller answered him, saying that it did not look like a bird, and so he made it look like one by doing what he did. Likewise, I was expected to cut all my interests to please her, and her supposedly faithful, God-loving brothers and sisters. No true friend would ever trim you, but accept who you really are, with all of you and all your memories. I have seen many wonderful people experiencing this with devastating results. Autonomy should never be surrendered. I could no longer live a life of pretense, and surely she could no longer exist in a fool's paradise. In respect to my characteristics and principles, I was never going to force her to accept me with all my interests, or to change herself, unlike the witnesses she was a member of, forcing others adhering to their belief system to live according to their dictates, issued forth from their headquarters. As one can see, all their ways are cultist, although they will never acknowledge it. As far as they are concerned, this is a very delicate issue that they would rather ignore. However, she had the courage to demand that I should help rescue our sinking family ship by following God's ways. In other words, she was trying to force me to become strictly dedicated to their movement. She completely ignored the suggestion of seeing an independent psychologist, yet she agreed to see a family counselor who suggested applying tolerance and acceptance of each other's interests. As far as the witnesses were concerned, I was drifting away from the righteous path by showing more interest in satanic practices, by attending evil lectures, by doing the devil's bidding, by tutoring groups of students on behavioral psychology, and showing great interest in gore, by being interested in anatomy or forensic investigation, and more devastatingly, not serving God. She lectured me day and night. We were no longer getting close to each other, not even sharing our bed anymore. At every opportunity, I was only hearing her complaints and nagging. She was often quoting passages from the Bible about certain characters' living standards as a teaching mechanism when preaching to me. It became exceedingly hard to take any longer. I can comfortably say she really helped me detest everything about the Bible and religion, everything about faith issues, belief systems, indeed everything about the idea of God and the devil. In reality, however, she was performing a great service, helping me remove myself completely from considering any man-made idea of supposedly a great deity, for which I am eternally grateful. I thought everything which proceeded from God was good, and everything that came from the devil was bad. However, everything said by their governing body under holy inspiration had not been anything but hatred and negativity. I learned that for some it was easier to blame others, but we should not forget that it takes two to tango. How interesting it is when life takes an unexpected and twisted turn at times, shattering all our dreams. But it can also be a great blessing in disguise for all parties concerned. While busying myself with things I did, or was involved in, interestingly, I was seen as if doing nothing other than being interested in devil worship. It was an intriguing viewpoint because I followed no particular belief system based upon man-made myths. Even if there was, substantive, a chance to accept the existence of a supreme, universal authority, I was unable to entertain the idea. Then again, anybody, not worshipping a god they alone have created in their own image, could only serve another master who was evil, and all atheists were considered in the same light. They were apparently those whom Jesus would condemn to everlasting hellfire, while he would usher God's only chosen, who were faithful to Jehovah, into a wonderful paradise world, to live there everlastingly. Magda preferred to live forever amongst all the faithful servants of a good God, who is eternally against the godless nations of the world. Remember that same God has created man and woman, telling them to multiply. Now, however, because they disobeyed his commandments, probably by worshipping graven images, although it was never clear what they were, instead of teaching them the ways of wisdom, he was ever ready to punish and even destroy them. So it seems that in the beginning God had supposedly created man in his perfect image, and then he created divisions, confusions, and enmity amongst them, so that they could commit sins, as written by men, under alleged holy inspiration. According to Jehovah's Witness wisdom, it was the evil one who was against God's creations, and was allowed to do the deed. Those men of God apparently spoke of God's wisdom, which the wicked did not follow. Would a normal functioning parent severely punish his or her child forever because he or she broke the grandmother's antique vase? This same God's words, as they appear in the Bible, advises adherers to the faith to literally beat the child with a rod, so that he will never deviate from following the right path in complete obedience. It may only be symbolic, but what is written by men is always taken literally by some. Magda, too, had the tendency to take such antiquated advice as truth. She performed quite a number of disciplines one could only patiently observe, for she took the Bible advice to extremes. Many times she even told me that if I did not fulfill my fatherly responsibilities, then she had to do what God expected of her when disciplining the children. By psychological observation alone, her extreme nature could only be equated to child abuse by severe punishments and literally breaking wooden spoons on their delicate bodies. Seeing something like that, I have cried in my silence, and thought that perhaps she has learnt it from her parents, or was advised by her brothers, who did not know any better. I considered taking this matter further by approaching the legal authorities, but was unsure how things would develop in a society where fathers had very few rights. My tolerant and jovial nature was not to her liking, and she considered me somewhat immature. Was she mature? I cannot claim to have always been a perfect partner to her, or perfect father to my children, but I considered their well-being above everything else. I have also raised my voice when frustrated, but always apologized for any discordance or hurt I may have caused, and aimed never to repeat such human traits. When Magda noticed this trend on my part, she was ever ready to chastise me for being so stupid, by helping the children to act and live like children. Therefore, I was apparently not a good father, whom she expected to be a harsh disciplinarian, like herself, needing to be as she had been instructed by their religious doctrines. I often felt that she was symbolically taking her frustrations out on me by punishing the children as if she was doing it to me. She would raise her voice, telling me in her broad German accent, "Mensch, you are not teaching the children like all the other Christian fathers do, and so ich muss do it instead." My desire to have a nice house for my family was equally criticized, for she did not want to be too materialistisch, telling me additionally she did not want anything from me any longer, as I was apparently a godless and evil man, repeating it often. In other words, she had already kicked me out of her life, for I was not in the truth. However, being chastised by her in front of the children did not teach them any respect towards me. This way Magda was punishing me in her supposed God-given wisdom and Christ-like understanding. I dared not even quote from the Bible a certain passage to explain anything. She would immediately treat me like garbage, shouting, "How dare you even talk about God to me, you devil-worshipper? You are an evil man." I had no choice but swallow it all, hoping for better times. For a very long time, I could not talk to her about any of my academic interests. Just as with my hobbies, my meeting like-minded people in astronomy, physics, medicine, even research into other interesting subjects, and now I could not even talk to her about fine arts or music. Obviously, she was a wife and partner only as long as I was seemingly in the truth. But my interests were not suitable to her, and therefore I could simply be the evil, interested only in those worldly matters. Indeed, she rendered herself into being a dreaded stranger, completely against me. This is what the Jehovah's Witness faith has created: discordance, enmity, and separations. Who indeed directed their footsteps? Was it God or the devil? She distanced herself more and more as time went by, and considered me evil, a wrongdoer, liar, and an untrustworthy person, instructing the children accordingly. I knew it because of my observation of them. They were showing signs of fear against the evil I presented, and they too were gradually distancing themselves, spending more time with their mother, reading Bible passages. When and if any of our children attempted to approach me, asking for a small favor, one would discover her watching them like a hawk, promptly calling them to Mama, for she had something to show them. They were no longer allowed to frolic, sing, or have fun like other children. If I wanted to take them to the movies or for a walk in the garden, Magda always found an excuse to keep them away from me, or want to take them to boring Bible-reading sessions with other Jehovah's Witnesses. She was not only preventing them from talking to me, but also quite literally keeping them away. In fact, the mid-1970s and early 80s have been like hell for both of us. I felt she needed a husband with an iron rod to lead her and the children in the Jehovah's Witnesses' way, a husband dedicated only to God's business and having no interests like I did, a husband who would make a good father to her children according to her real desires. Apparently, I was none of them, and was again the pure evil. I wondered what trends my children would develop towards me after being forced to believe from a very young age that their father was a bad guy, only wanting to hurt others, only telling lies. It was so clear that they were learning and processing their opinions about their father being a man ever ready to do ugly and socially unacceptable things. I was so certain that particularly now, in their young and imaginative minds, they were seeing awful things incorporated with my persona. She was following some advice from what she believed as a Bible-based and righteous source. She was succeeding in alienating the children against me. Perhaps, in a sense, by doing what she did, she was indirectly punishing me with eternal torment. Did she realize what she was doing? Did she know, by any chance, that what was done on her part was truly evil? Perhaps she was doing the devil's bidding, considering it as the righteous will of Jehovah. When the children were inflicted with her supposed disciplines against me, on the holy advice Magda followed, there was not one single doubt in my mind that she was literally creating in them false memories of me as the greatest or even the only evil being in their lives. How would they cope with it when they become adults? What if they developed psychotic traumas later in their adult years? How would Magda live with such an ill she has inflicted them with? Did she know by any chance that she was doing great harm, and indeed the devil's bidding herself? Did she at all realize that she was doing all she could do under direct control of the witnesses she adored? Had she at all any feelings to be able to understand things other than punishing me without question? Did she by any chance feel supreme by doing what she did, like church leaders of the Dark Ages? Many weeks passed. She hardly spent any time at home, and rarely spoke to me, and I hardly saw my children, for she either took them visiting Jehovah's Witness brothers, or I was walking the streets. Only rarely, late at night, could I see them while they slept, briefly admiring their innocent faces, fearful in case I woke them or Magda up and be accused of disrupting their peace. I chose to spend time in the lounge, where I was graciously allowed to sleep for short periods of time, and had a silent cry, wishing things were more favorable. One morning after breakfast, when I offered the usual money for expenses, she shouted at me, saying that she didn't want anything from me any longer, and didn't even want to touch me, ordering me to drop the money on the table. Although illegal, I contemplated burning the banknotes in front of her. Several days later, she came home after talking to some of her brothers and sisters, saying her faithful friends advised her to speak with me instead of breaking the family, for she could be at fault also. This was certainly very unusual for her, or the witnesses to suggest something like that, for they all considered me as the Antichrist. However, when considering all their teachings, as can be seen in their publications throughout the years, they considered the United Nations as the Antichrist. And yet they are a member of what they condemned, leaving one puzzled about their own status. She said she was advised to have a little holiday, probably in Hobart, and after a period of relaxing and faithful contemplation, she could come back with a fresh outlook on life, and things would turn out to be better for her. This greatly amazed me. But what was broken, just like antique china, would never be perfectly repaired. And our so-called family was in that state. However, I never believed what Magda told me in regard to what her brothers and sisters had advised her, and thought that it was more likely to be a spying activity to test me. On the other hand, maybe some Jehovah's Witnesses were beginning to think that what they tried to achieve was wrong. Had they looked at their holy book, where it was written, "Let no man put asunder what God has put together." But I was yet to discover how wrong I was in thinking this way, and it was subsequently proved, once again, how cold and calculating they were. They may have noticed how unhappy their dear sister appeared, and perhaps decided to try one more time before they helped her separate from her unfaithful husband permanently. Who knows? All my interests remained completely isolated when we were together, making me feel just the way I always felt, like an illegal alien. Our togetherness had always felt restricted before, and now it felt as if I was housed in a huge mausoleum when together with her within the same dwelling. She felt unloved due to her husband drifting away from the righteous path of the witnesses, and more secure in her witness-controlled space. Similarly, my interest in philosophy and all other sciences was constantly undermined, as if I was supporting the devil's ways. I dared say nothing. I dared play nothing on the Hammond, or any other instrument like my piano, and I dared, it seemed, not even breathe. She constantly told me that I had become nothing to her. Would this new attitude of hers, after being advised by her brothers, reverse the situation? Then she suddenly asked me if I was still faithful to her, if I was willing to rescue my family from falling deeper, and if I was willing to stop devil worship. She said she was willing to try it again, if I could also do some alterations to my person. What alterations were expected of me, I wondered. Was I not thoroughly trimmed down enough yet? At least having some dialogue with her looked promising. Anything was better than complete silence. I explained that I never changed. I missed my children she had deliberately alienated. I was not interested in any extramarital affairs, and my personal interests were not of a harmful nature as painted by her faithful brothers. She emphasized that one could not blame our brothers for that. I asked her about those ladies who complained about my supposed black girlfriend, as they judged me in their own righteous way. What indeed did they know about me? They never knew me, and yet were judging me. Were they not also witnesses? She asked me again and again if that black girl was my new friend, and if I had sex with her. That was just a young girl who sat next to me asking for directions. How devastating it was that some people interpreted it in their biased ways of thinking, literally trying to break a family through idle gossip. But was it not traditionally the natural Jehovah's Witness way? Magda appeared to accept my explanation reluctantly, but I could not trust the situation any longer, and could certainly not trust her. However, she could not accept the fact that her dearest sisters were telling lies about me. The children, on the other hand, were totally under her influence, behaving completely against me. I asked if the damage they had been inflicted with could be reversed. She did not see it as anything to worry about. Yet time would eventually prove me either wrong or show me that my worries were realized. I only hoped I was wrong.